The objective of the League was to become the eventual administrator of a 500,000-man force which would storm the White House and overthrow President Roosevelt. The plan was to then establish a dictatorship which would immediately enact the economic austerity plans of Hjalmar Schacht's labor camps already being applied in Nazi Germany. All they needed was a man with credit among the military legions to lead this coup. Unfortunately for them, the man they tried to seduce was a true American, retired General Smedley Butler. He knew the corruption of government and big business intimately from his past, and refused to succumb to playing the role of an American Hitler. General Butler contacted a trusted Philadelphia publisher, and by the time enough evidence was collected to substantiate the story, Butler took this plot to the Senate, and as the press hit the stands, the hearings began. The plot was exposed.
The plan as outlined to me was to form an organization of veterans, to use as a bluff or as a club at least, to intimidate the government and break down our democratic institutions. The upshot of the whole thing was that I was supposed to lead an organization of 500,000 men, which would be able to take over the functions of government.
The defeat of this attempted coup was only another step in Roosevelt's re-establishment of the strength of the U.S. Constitution as a living principle of government. His response to the coup attempt was to further recruit the population to the approaching global war against fascism and poverty.
These economic royalists complain that we seek to overthrow the institutions of America. What they really complain of is that we seek to take away their power. Our allegiance and our allegiance to American institutions requires the overthrow of this kind of power. Against economic tyranny such as this, the American citizen could only appeal to the organized power of government. We well remember that the collapse of 1929 showed up the despotism for what it was. And the election of 1932 was the people's mandate to end it, and under that mandate, it is being ended. It is not alone a war against want and destitution and economic demoralization. It is more than that. It is a war for the survival of democracy. We are fighting to save a great and precious form of government for ourselves and for the world. And so I accept the commission you have tendered me. I join with you. I am enlisted for the duration of the war.
The story of the battles and the plans for World War II has been told over and over again. What has not been told is the story of the war between the American and the British system to determine the future of civilization, which took place in discussions between the two individuals who represented these outlooks, President Roosevelt and Prime Minister of Britain, Winston Churchill. The story is perhaps best told through the eyes of Franklin Roosevelt's own son, Elliott Roosevelt, who attended and later transcribed many of these discussions.
Winston is at the dinner table, Father, and already giving quite a speech. Shall we go?
He shall come to understand this time. He must. World events are outpacing our resolve.
What do you mean, Father?
Winston would like to think I wasn't serious last time, but tonight is a different story. You know, Elliot, after flying over Africa, I've had some important thoughts about the future of the world. If you look at the Great Salt Flats in southern Tunisia, you can see that at one time it must have been a vast inland sea. You also have the rivers that spring up in the Atlas Mountains to the south and disappear under the Sahara to become subterranean rivers. Why not take these waters and divert this water flow for irrigation? It'd make the Imperial Valley in California look like a cabbage patch. And the salt flats. They were once below the level of the Mediterranean. You could dig a canal straight back to recreate that lake, 150 miles long, 60 miles wide. The Sahara would bloom for hundreds of miles. It is true, wealth. The Sahara is not just sand, it has an amazingly rich potential. Imperialists don't realize what wealth is, what wealth they can create. They've robbed these continents of billions, and all because they were too short-sighted to understand that their billions were pennies compared to the possibilities. Possibilities that must include a better life for the people who inhabit this land.
Just then, Vice President Wallace came in.
I can't take this, Franklin. I just spent an hour talking with the British Foreign Minister. He was trying to convince me that after the war, the United States and the British have to contain the threat of communism. I said, fascism, communism, capitalism all come from the same point of view, and the British economics is no different. And all he could do was stare at the ceiling and spout some hullabaloo about Darwin. These people are the damnedest fools.
Henry, you need more finesse.
Finesse.
You see, most of these folks are just victims of this old system. Their system uses them more than they use it. We've got to be impatiently patient, Henry.
Franklin, we've got our very own fascist here in this country, just waiting to subvert us all over again. We have to move fast to solve this thing.
Yes, but after the war, the cries will come that the present unity will no longer be necessary, and that's when the job will begin, in earnest. One sentence. When we've won the war, I will work with all my might and main to see to it that the United States is not wheedled into the position of accepting any plan that will further France's imperialistic ambitions or that will aid or abet the British Empire in its imperial ambitions. Winston has got to listen to me this time. He'll find out this time.
Father Wallace and I walked into the room together and sat down at the table. There were pleasant jokes and light discussion for most of the evening. After everyone had eaten, and making sure the Prime could hear him, Father began to talk loudly to one of the guests.
You know, my friend over there doesn't understand how most of our people feel about Britain and her role in the life of other peoples. It's in the American tradition, this distrust, this dislike and even hatred of Britain. There are many kinds of Americans, of course, but as a people, as a country, we're opposed to imperialism. We can't stomach it.
He looked at Churchill with a smile significantly. The Prime Minister sat like a Buddha, a big cigar in his face.
The point, which I am having a hard time getting across to some people, is that many Americans are anti-British. Take me. God knows, and my friend knows, I'm not anti-British now, but I remember very clearly that when I was 7 or thereabouts, in 1889 or 90, and my mother took me to England, and we saw Queen Victoria drive in her carriage down a London street, why, I hated the old woman.
At this point, most of the dinner guests slowly made their way out of the room, while Churchill sat there, sinking in his chair, immediately lighting another cigar. By the time the room cleared out, it was only Father, Churchill, Wallace, and myself.